You don't speak to God when you're safe. You speak to Him when you've run out of people to pretend for. When the mask has cracked so completely that even you can see through it. When you're alone in a room that should feel familiar, but instead feels like a courtroom where you are both the accused and the only witness. You speak to God when you finally stop lying, and that terrifies you more than silence ever could. Søren Kierkegaard spent his life circling a truth that most of us spend our lives avoiding. He called it despair, not the kind that makes you cry in public, the kind that you carry quietly, the kind that lives in the space between what you show the world and what you feel when no one is watching. He said that most people are in despair without even knowing it. They build lives that look complete from the outside. They smile at the right moments. They say the right things. But inside, there's a quiet scream, a voice that says, "This isn't me. This isn't real. I don't even know who I am anymore." And Kierkegaard believed that this despair, this deep, silent suffering, is the only place where real prayer begins. Because prayer, for him, wasn't about words. It wasn't about rituals or requests or repeating phrases you learned as a child. Prayer was the act of standing before God, without armor, without excuses, without the version of yourself you've been performing for everyone else. It was the act of being seen. And that's why most of us avoid it. You know the feeling. You sit down to pray, and suddenly your mind fills with noise. You think about groceries. You think about work. You think about the argument you had last week, the text you haven't answered, the person you've been avoiding. You think about everything except the thing you came here to feel. Because what you came here to feel is terrifying. You came here because somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the distractions, beneath the carefully constructed narrative of your life, there's a truth you've been running from, a question you've refused to ask, a loneliness you've refused to name. And God, if He exists, knows it. Kierkegaard said that God doesn't want your performance. He doesn't want the polished version of you that shows up to church or closes your eyes at dinner. He wants the part of you that you hide, the part that feels unworthy, the part that doubts, the part that's angry, the part that's so tired of pretending that you can barely hold yourself together anymore. He wants the real you, and the real you is the one you've been teaching yourself to ignore. There's a moment in every person's life when they realize they've been performing, not just for others, for themselves. You wake up one day and you don't recognize the person in the mirror, not because you've changed, but because you realize you never really knew them to begin with. You've been so busy playing the role you thought you were supposed to play that you forgot to ask if it was even yours. You've been the good son, the dependable friend, the strong one, the one who doesn't complain, the one who has it all figured out. And somewhere along the way, you lost yourself in the script. Kierkegaard called this self-deception. He said it's the most dangerous kind of despair. Because when you're deceiving yourself, you can't even see that you're suffering. You think you're fine. You think you're happy. You think you're faithful. But deep down, in a place you don't visit anymore, there's a version of you who's been waiting, who's been banging on the walls, who's been screaming, "This isn't who we are. This isn't what we wanted. We are dying in here." And you've been too afraid to listen, because listening would mean admitting that everything you've built is built on sand. that the life you're living isn't the one you chose, that the prayers you've been praying aren't real prayers at all. They're negotiations, they're transactions, they're ways of asking God to bless the life you've constructed without ever asking if it's the life He called you to live. Kierkegaard said that to truly speak to God, you have to stop negotiating. You have to stop asking Him to make your life easier while you keep pretending to be someone you're not. You have to come to Him broken, and you have to mean it. Let me tell you about a night I'll never forget. I was alone in my apartment. It was 3 in the morning, the kind of hour when the world feels abandoned and every sound echoes louder than it should. I had been lying in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling a weight in my chest that I couldn't name. I got up, I sat on the floor, and for the first time in years, I tried to pray, but nothing came out. Not because I didn't believe, but because I realized I didn't know how to be honest anymore. Every prayer I'd ever spoken had been a performance, a list of things I was supposed to want, a confession of sins I was supposed to feel guilty about, a request for blessings I thought would make me happy. But that night, sitting on that cold floor, I didn't want any of those things. I wanted to stop pretending. I wanted someone to see me. Not the version I'd been showing everyone. Not the capable one. Not the faithful one. But the scared one. The lost one. The one who had no idea what he was doing or why he felt so empty. And so I spoke. Not in polished sentences. Not in religious language. I just said what I felt. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so tired of pretending. I don't even know if you're listening. And in that moment, something shifted. Not because I felt God's presence. Not because I heard a voice or saw a sign. But because for the first time, I was being honest. I was speaking to God without a script. Without trying to sound faithful. Without trying to earn something. I was just being real. And that, I realized later, was the prayer Kierkegaard had been talking about all along. There's a story Kierkegaard tells, not in words, but in his own life. A man who loved a woman, but couldn't marry her. A man who believed in God, but struggled with faith every single day. A man who wrote about truth and authenticity while battling his own despair in private. He didn't have answers, he had questions. And he believed that questions, honest, painful, terrifying questions, were closer to God than any certainty ever could be. Because certainty is safe. Certainty is comfortable. Certainty lets you sleep at night. But God doesn't live in your comfort. He lives in the place where you're afraid to go. In the doubt you won't admit. In the anger you've been taught to suppress. In the grief you've been carrying for so long that you've forgotten it's even there. You don't speak to God when you have the right words. You speak to Him when you've run out of words entirely. When all you have left is the raw, unfiltered truth of what you feel. I'm afraid. I'm angry. I'm alone. I don't know if I believe anymore. I don't know who I am. Those aren't failures of faith. Kierkegaard would say those are the beginning of it. Because faith isn't certainty. Faith is the decision to stand before God, even when you don't understand, even when you're angry, even when you feel nothing at all. Faith is the courage to be honest. Here's what nobody tells you about honesty. It doesn't feel liberating at first. It feels like betrayal, because you've spent your whole life building walls, learning what's acceptable to feel and what isn't, learning which parts of yourself to show and which parts to bury so deep, that even you forget they're there. You've learned to be grateful when you're angry, to be faithful when you're doubting, to be strong when you're falling apart. And now, to truly speak to God, you have to betray all of that training. You have to let yourself feel the things you've been taught are wrong to feel. The resentment toward the people you're supposed to love. The doubt about the beliefs you're supposed to hold. The exhaustion with a life that looks successful but feels empty. You have to admit that you're not who everyone thinks you are. And worse, you have to admit that you're not who you thought you were either. Kierkegaard understood this. He wrote that the self is not something you are, it's something you become. And the process of becoming requires you to shed every false version of yourself you've been carrying. It requires you to die. Not physically, but in every other way that matters. To die to the expectations, to die to the performance, to die to the person you thought you had to be in order to be loved. And that kind of death is excruciating because it means standing before God and before yourself completely naked, with no defenses, no explanations, no carefully crafted story about why you are the way you are, just the raw truth of your existence, the loneliness you've been hiding, the fear that you're not enough, the anger that you've been swallowing for years, the grief for the life you thought you'd have, the shame for the person you've become, all of it. And you have to trust that God can hold it, that He won't turn away, that He won't condemn you, that He won't ask you to go back to pretending, that He'll simply see you, and that somehow, in ways you can't understand yet, that will be enough. Here's the hardest part. You've spent your whole life learning how to hide, how to manage your image, how to control what people see, how to be acceptable, how to be loved. And now, to truly speak to God, you have to unlearn all of it. You have to let yourself be seen in the parts of you that aren't acceptable. The jealousy, the bitterness, the shame, the fear that you're not enough and never have been. You have to let Him see the version of you that you've been trying to kill and that feels like dying, because in a way, it is. Kierkegaard called it the leap of faith, not because it's joyful, but because it requires you to let go of everything you've been holding on to. Every defense, every excuse, every carefully crafted story you've been telling yourself about who you are and why your life is the way it is. You have to fall, and you have to trust that God will catch you. Not the God you've been praying to, not the God who's supposed to fix everything and make your life easier, but the God who sees you completely, who knows the worst parts of you, and who loves you anyway. Not because you're good, but because you're His. I think about the people who've sat where you're sitting now, the ones who feel like they're failing at faith because they can't muster the right feelings, because their prayers feel hollow, because they go through the motions but feel nothing. And I want to tell them what Kierkegaard would say. You're not failing, you're waking up. You're waking up to the fact that performance isn't the same as presence, that saying the right words isn't the same as speaking the truth, that looking faithful isn't the same as being honest, and that waking up is painful because it means seeing how much of your life has been a lie. Not a malicious lie, but a protective one. A lie you told yourself in order to survive, in order to be accepted, in order to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of being truly known. But here's what I've learned. God doesn't need your performance. He's not impressed by your ability. to say the right things, or feel the right feelings, or show up at the right times. He's waiting for you to stop trying so hard. He's waiting for you to collapse, to admit that you can't do this anymore, that you're tired, that you're scared, that you don't have it figured out. He's waiting for you to be real, because that's when the real conversation begins. So how do you truly speak to God? You stop performing, you stop pretending, you stop asking for things you think you're supposed to want. You sit in the silence and you let yourself feel what you've been avoiding. The loneliness, the fear, the ache that has no name, the grief for the person you thought you'd become, the anger at the life you didn't get to live. You let it all rise to the surface. And then you speak, not in perfect sentences, not in borrowed prayers, but in the messy, broken, honest language of a soul that's finally tired of hiding. You say the things you've been too afraid to say, the doubts you've been too ashamed to admit, the anger you've been taught is sinful, the exhaustion you've been told is weakness. You say them out loud, or you say them in the quiet of your own heart, and you trust that He's listening, not because you've earned it, not because you've done everything right, but because He's been waiting for you to stop pretending. He's been waiting for the real you, the one who's scared, the one who's angry, the one who doesn't have it all figured out, the one who's willing to be honest. Kierkegaard never promised that this would feel good. He never said that faith would bring peace or that prayer would bring answers. He said it would bring freedom, the freedom to stop hiding, the freedom to stop performing, the freedom to be who you are in all your brokenness, and to trust that it's enough, not because you're strong, but because you're honest. And honesty, even when it's painful, is the only language God truly speaks. So tonight, when you sit alone in the dark and you feel that familiar ache, don't run from it. Don't distract yourself. Don't fill the silence with noise. Don't reach for your phone or your work or the version of yourself you've been pretending to be. Just sit and let yourself feel. And when you're ready, speak. Not the prayer you think you're supposed to say, but the one that's been waiting inside you all along. The one that's real, the one that's yours. That's how you speak to God. And maybe, just maybe, that's where He's been waiting for you all along. In the honesty you've been too afraid to offer. In the brokenness you've been trying to hide. In the truth you've been running from your entire life. He's been there, waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to come home. Not to the person you pretend to be, but to the person you've always been. The one who's scared and lost and imperfect. The one who's honest. The one who's real. That's who He wants to meet. And that's the only conversation that's ever mattered.